Hello. This is a presentation on political institutions, two, especially on institutional arrangements by Jacob and Nicholas. Our first slide is about an ideal democracy. And this question is open-ended. What is your definition of an ideal democracy? Here's mine. Mine include tolerance and cooperation among the people, limited effective government, and trust in the authority of government. Third, able to vote, and the voices are actually heard, and you have a representative in the government. And fourth, good economic prosperity. And I am curious to know what yours are. On to the next slide. Activities in the government that claim to be democratic. In examining Cuba, Zimbabwe, and Kuwait, we look at their activities in their government, how they claim to be a democracy, because all three do claim to be a democracy. But let's look at Cuba. So first is Cuba. More people vote than in the U.S., and they get more benefits. Wouldn't that be considered a good democracy, a nice democracy? Second, in Zimbabwe, they vote as well, and they vote for their president and their legislature. Again, another key note of a democracy. And third, Singapore. They also hold elections. Next is how we might consider them to not be democracies. So the slide before this one showed how they could be considered democracies in some respects of giving their citizens benefits, being heard, their voices being heard, voting for your president and your legislature. But it seems to be a catch-all for countries who claim to be a democracy is, hey, we hold elections, therefore we are a democracy. But as stated in my slide earlier, an ideal democracy has 4 points. One of them, yes, being able to vote and your voice is heard and having representatives. But there are also other key points to a democracy. And I'm wondering, what's your take on that? Does a democracy just mean able to vote and benefits for the citizens? Or does it have to contain the other points that I discussed? Good economic prosperity, a limited effective government and trust in the authority of the government from the people, and a tolerance and a cooperation among the people themselves. I'm curious to see what you have to think on that. But moving on to how Cuba and Zimbabwe and others are not democracies. And for this specific exercise, we'll just look at Cuba, Zimbabwe, and Singapore. So how they aren't democracies. Cuba can be classified under a dictatorship. Although the citizens vote, they have no opportunity to replace the current leader. And the leader has no limited mandate, which in my criteria of a pure democracy, an ideal democracy, you have to have limited government and a leader with a limited mandate, which is also implied. Zimbabwe, for our second example, Zimbabwe and Singapore as well are classified under an authoritarian regime where the ruler is not constrained and the citizens' rights are limited. The citizens of these countries can't question the authority or the decisions of the policy being made. I think that's an important factor to consider about democracies in general. As an intrinsic value of a democracy, are we as the citizens able to trust in our authority? Are we able to question our authority? And that brings up the issue of free speech. Is free speech vital for a democracy, for a thriving democracy? I think yes. In my criteria of an ideal democracy, I'm always going back. You have to have those values and rights as a citizen. Other points to note about Zimbabwe and Singapore as being an authoritarian regime. And I tend to get authoritarian and totalitarian confused. Authoritarian, um, their leader is not constrained, and the citizens are limited in what they can do politically. Now, authoritarian doesn't necessarily dabble into every single person's life, but they do not allow them very many political rights. And so, like Singapore, their religion, their occupation, social life is not under control, but their political rights are under control. The same way with Kuwait, Algeria, and Zimbabwe, as I said earlier. And totalitarian is control over every aspect of their life, politically and personally. So, they have control of religion, culture, economics, morality, thoughts, actions. And it's a constant and pervasive, extensive coercion over their citizens to do what they want. Just like Afghanistan under the Taliban, Cambodia under Pol Pot, North Korea, Indonesia, and the list goes on and on. But the importance here for a democracy is that the citizens have political rights, that they can vote. Their voices can be heard. They can have free speech, and among others, and that they have cooperation among themselves, or they're able to have cooperation among themselves. They trust in their government. Their economy is prosperous. And so, all in all, these countries engage in practicing voting, but their leaders are not constrained necessarily. And that's where I will give my partner some time to talk about.